Hello and welcome to Reaching for the Moon, presented by Everglades Moon Local Council, Florida chapter of Covenant of the Goddess. COG supports individual works by its covens, members, and local councils. It's a vibrant network of a myriad of Wiccan and witchy resources, religious support, friendships, service opportunities, and more. To find out more, visit our website, emlc.net, our Facebook page, facebook.com/EvergladesMoon, or Twitter, @EMLCTweets.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a bonus episode of Reaching for the Moon. This is episode 37. Like I said, it's a bonus episode. In this one, we're going to feature Rayna's workshop from a prior event, and her workshop is called Bees, Ants, and Spiders as Spiritual Allies. It was a really fun workshop. But like all of our workshops, and most pagan workshops, it happens outside. So you will hear some rustling of leaves, you'll hear a little coughing, people moving about, you'll hear playing occasionally, but I think I got the sound quality well enough that you can get everything that's being said, and hopefully it's not too distracting for you. I know it's a little different when you're listening to it than when you're physically present, but most of our workshops are so well done that I really do want to present them to you as often as we possibly can. I know a lot of people who would love to join us for our events are not able to. And this is one of our ways of sharing our knowledge with you when you're not able to actually attend the event itself. Speaking of events, Alpandia will be along later on to tell you all about the upcoming Turning the Tides that's happening in December 8th, 9th, and 10th of this year. You really should try to attend. What's better than Florida in December? I mean, seriously, escape from the snow and the cold. Come on down. Before we get to that, though, we're going to hear Urania Sings by Emerald Rose from their album Archives of Ages to Come. And you can learn more about Emerald Rose and purchase their music at emeraldrose.com. After that, we'll go right into Rayna's workshop. Blessed be.
Urania waits in the coldest space. She tempts astronomers from their sleep. She teaches things beyond the reach of human ken, and gives them answers in their dreams. Tide and time are her lovers, and her heart is a star. Calls the mind to mystery. I heed her call each night at the setting of the sun, and learn the song that the heavens sing. Urania sings, she opens up the sky. Urania sings, all the mysteries of space and time. She sings, and the heavens open wide. Urania sings, and the universe is mine when Urania sings. They say astronomers in the ancient days spent their nights with a beautiful muse. Dark as space are the tresses of her night black hair, and on her brow the crescent moon. Stars join in on the chorus, and she wakes me up at night with her celestial symphonies. I call her name on the essence of a night-long prayer. She shows me secrets in her wings. Urania sings, she opens up my mind. Urania sings, all the mysteries of space and time. She sings, and the heavens open wide. Urania sings, and the universe is mine. When Urania sings. Calls in the dark of night. She lures astronomers from their beds, tells them things that they will never understand, and puts strange questions in their heads. I'll never be afraid of the dark again. She's got that moonlight in her eyes. She likes to wear her stardust party dress. She takes me dancing in the sky. Urania sings, she opens up my mind. Urania sings, all the mysteries of space and time. She sings, and the heavens open wide. Urania sings, and the universe is mine. When Urania sings, she opens up my mind. Urania sings, all the mysteries of space and time. She sings, and the heavens open wide. Urania sings, and the universe is mine. When Urania sings.
This workshop rose out of a desire to explore a little bit more two different things. One, I am very much an earth creature. Thinking of myself, the more I do fairy seership, the more I feel like a little mushroom type of spirit. And so I wanted to go farther down the rabbit hole of some of our connections with non-human spirits on the earth. And sometimes that has taken the form of thinking about ancestor work, and this particular workshop, though, came out of thinking about working more with the animal totems that Orion mentions, and that are also powerful animals to a lot of different spiritual traditions. And as a lot of you know, I've been working with bees as spiritual teachers for many years now, and so expanding into ants and spiders was sort of like a logical next step. But the other thing that really was the inspiration for this was following up on this idea of wicked oaths, things that our ancestors did that cut us off from our power today. While we know and acknowledge that we are in recovery from having been persecuted for our faith and our power, we don't always know the specifics of how that happened. And I think one of the things that happened was that we had to promise not to do a lot of the coolest, witchiest stuff that we did back in the day, and by promising not to do it, we actually severed some connections from those sources of power. So this workshop is an offering to you to consider reclaiming some of that power, because it's really exciting when people remember that power. I don't think we really have to go looking for it. I think it already exists, but I think we have to remember that we have access to it. So for me, you'll see how these two things connect eventually. Okay, so I don't know how much you guys know about this tradition, and this workshop is not specifically limited to this tradition, but a few of us have been studying fairy work with Orion Foxwood. And whether you are working with Orion Foxwood, R.J. Stewart, Jan Fortune, whoever your source is for working with the Fae, it always comes down to detoxifying from the preconceptions that we have that we are not connected to the Fae, that we're not connected to the energies of the earth, that we're not connected to animal spirits, that we're not connected to our ancestors. This is the dominant reality's imposition on us, often happens, we can all probably, if we take a moment, remember that point of childhood when somebody told you that you didn't see the spirits that you saw, or you didn't hear that voice, and it carries forward from there, and we're systematically sort of taught not to feel that connection that I think most of us who are here on this path know instinctively, and we're in the process of reclaiming. We're in the process of honoring that connection. So working with the Fae as a class, a family of non-human spirits, is largely about allowing yourself to work with the Fae and allowing yourself to believe and to trust your belief that they exist and that they are partners with humans. So, which sounds super simple, but it's actually really hard to get rid of the programming that you're crazy, or that this is silly, or that it's make-believe, or pretend. So a lot of our faith is about allowing ourselves to actually feel the connections that some inner witch in us, some inner pagan or shaman knows to be true. And part of that is quieting some fears. So fears come up sometimes when we allow ourselves to feel really connected. Maybe not so much for pagans. We might think that we don't have the fears that come up because we're out worshiping the moon and dancing in circles. But as we push deeper in the path, we often will run up against things where we feel like maybe that sounds a little crazy. Maybe that's a little too far. And from this, in this way, we should take a lesson from our New Age brethren who just kind of let it flow at a certain point. The channeling community, when they get plugged in, they don't tend to question it as much as we do. If you take anything away from this particular workshop, I offer this space right here to just allow yourself to suspend the disbelief and the fear that you might be crazy if the Fae are talking to you, or if you're looking to find the Fae, or if you hear the Fae talking to you. Because now, after doing this for a while, I have no doubt that the Fae are our partners on this earth, and while they don't really need us to work with them, it's more beneficial for all of us if we do work with them. And that there are lots of different classes and families of non-human spirits on the earth. The Fae are just one of them, and they're very connected to the earth and the karma, or the destiny of the earth. And so myself as a little mushroom, I feel like the more I learn about them and how they work, the better. This is kind of like being conscious about the relationships that we have and looking to them for growth. Our relationship to the earth is one that we can always deepen, and we can always find new ways to unfold. Certainly working with the Fae and trying to understand them and listen to them, listen to the earth, which is really what we're trying to do this whole weekend, is give ourselves the space, the opportunity, and the support to listen to the earth a little bit. So the reason we like the Fae are guides in this is that the Fae are already plugged in to the inscape, or to that web of connection that exists beyond most of our consciousness. So we can remember how to see it because we used to see it, and humans are born to be able to see this. And see is not quite the right word, right? Some people feel it, some people hear it, and some people see it. Some people are fortunate enough to have all of those skills, but we can work on building any of those, but some of us are born with sort of an easier way to do it, one or the other. Inscape is just an interesting kind of phrase or term to describe this interconnectedness. Some people call it a web of the way in which the breath I exhale feeds the plants, who in turn fall and nurture the earth that grows the food that I eat. And that's like one of the most simplistic example, right? So there's so many different interconnections that we all have with the earth and with the non-human spirits on the earth. So the Fae are guides because they are of the inscape, and as are we, but they are of the inscape and have never had to forget these connections. And one of the things, if you're interested in pursuing this and learning more about that's well articulated by Orion, is the contract that we have with the Fae to do this together, which I'm not going to get into that much, but I just want to encourage you that they are guides for this work. And this workshop actually is the result of me working with a fairy contact guide that I have. And so we've been developing, through working with Orion, ways in which to be able to receive information, guidance really, which is about remembering, really. It's kind of like getting out of your own way of hearing this information that we already know if we're plugged in like witches. One of the like speaking with the Fae, like being able to hear messages when you're drifting off to sleep, or remember the messages from your dreams that are particularly different than other dreams, or hearing the plants talk to you when you're gardening, or being able to read the weather. All of these forms of communication, of exchange that we have, a whole skill set related to that is communicating with animals. And so some people are really good at this naturally, and some people build the skill and work hard to be good with it. I think if you have ever had a pet, you know how you can read a pet's communication and how the pet can talk to you even if you don't see the pet, and how that kind of nonverbal communication happens all the time, especially the more open you are to it, right? So some of us choose to develop this more with other animals as well. And, we all know about the dog whisperer and horse whisperers, and there are beekeepers who have really developed their ability to read information. They really they sense it, they feel it, right? Bees pick up on pheromones, and humans pick up on bee energy. And so good beekeepers, no matter how fundamentalist Christian they are, have a feeling that they use to guide them in what they're doing. So there's lots of different examples of this. One of them is insects. And a lot of pagans spend a lot of time on the big mammals. I like to call them the big ones, the big guys. Like the bears. How many people do you know who have pagans who have bear totems? Wolves. There's quite a few horses. And those are cool because we share a lot with mammals. We share a lot of similar energies with mammals. Everybody's got to hunt and eat. All mammals have to hunt and eat, and we bear our young in the same way, and we sort of form communities and packs. But insects often are maybe later down the list for pagans to work with, except for beekeeper pagans. There's, I would say, a tendency to overlook the relationship we can have with insects and insect communication with pagans. And I think this is really interesting. At first it was just interesting to me as an oddity, like why is this? Why do we go for the fuzzy things? And then I realized it's actually really kind of interestingly profound, I think, reflecting our history as witches. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. So let me talk for a second about the threefold life. This is just a really common way to describe this inscape, this fact that we are all connected, that Orion describes it as an underworld, a surface world, and an upper world. We use the same terminology to describe classic Maya belief that in my academic job. So, so many different cultures around the world have had a similar sense of it's a metaphor for describing how energy works, right? We understand that there's a certain kind of energy here on the surface world, and that it's inhabited by beings that look like us and do things like us, and as well as other things. And then there's an energy that's beyond our comprehension, but that we know is up there because it intersects with us in certain ways here on this earth. And there's an energy beneath us feet that is also different, but really connected, obviously connected, like physically connected, but also energetically connected, but yet different, right? So different metaphors for this. The threefold life uses that as a way to describe this fact that there are these three different sort of planes of existence. But it goes beyond that to say that there's also, each of us have a nature that is connected or derives from those three different types of energy. So we have a surface walker, an entity or a part of our soul that's here on this planet. It's meant to eat and sleep and use the bathroom and have sex and look at things and absorb energy and information and process it and connect with people and also. And we also have a part of our nature which derives from the underworld, which is connected to history and time and the ancestral flow, right? We bury the dead in the earth for a reason, and the earth holds all of that energy for us, of the past. And we also have a part of us that is always reaching out, reaching farther than our current existence. And that's reaching to the stars, or reaching to the sky, or reaching up, or reaching out. And that's sort of the upper world part of us. And so we could spend a whole workshop just talking about the threefold life, and I don't want to do that too much, but one of the things that a lot of different religious traditions, not just fairy seership, teach, if you kind of are trying to be aware of those three different aspects of yourself, if you're trying to bring them into some kind of alignment with each other, some kind of, even just awareness is the most important step forward. You are then kind of plugged in a way that's different than most of us walking around on the earth today. Most of the people we know, most of the people we intersect with are struggling to find a sense of connection. They've been told that they're not connected, and they believe that, and it's easy to keep yourself unconnected, even though always in the back of our mind there's these little things that kind of remind us that we are connected. And if we just had the time to follow those up, or the right teacher to follow those up, maybe we would find something there. But no, I gotta watch this show. So we constantly reinforce our unconnection, which we know to be a lie. And I think anybody who's here knows that that's a fib that we've told ourselves. So this threefold life, it's a metaphor again, and one of the ways that you can understand that metaphor is the fact that there are three animal totems that go along with these three worlds in the fairy seership tradition, but these are animal totems that many different cultures have used, again, as a metaphor for connecting to a certain kind of energy. So for the underworld, for the earth itself and everything beneath it, for the deep time, for our ancestral core, the soul stream of the planet, that totem is the ant. And so ants are super powerful, super plentiful, right? Most common animal on the planet. Every square inch. People kept asking me if I was going to bring spiders to this workshop and make you guys touch spiders. But you know what? Spiders have been touching you all weekend, probably. And ants have definitely been touching you because... I haven't seen as many bees because of the rain, but basically bugs are everywhere. I didn't even have to give you the numbers, but there's like so many bugs everywhere. We just don't even see them, in part because of things I'm going to talk about in just a second. But so ants bring oxygen to the earth, right? That's one of the main things they do. They dig these tunnels and anthills that we see, but mostly they're underground. And so if you ever get the chance to see scientists who've mapped out those tunnels, it's crazy highways and condominiums of ants underground. And so they are bringing the air, the oxygen, which is one of the most creative substances on this planet, one of the most powerful, like power-laden substances, oxygen, down into the earth. So they're literally bringing sort of creative starlight energy down into the earth. They're doing this bridging work that this planet is all about, in my opinion. Right? So ants have this connection to deep time because they're underground. One of the things that I've also done in workshops is talk to people about how when we bury the dead in the ground, and the dead become part of the ground, and then we plant plants in that ground. And again, not so much in our culture today because we try to sanitize the death process so much, but in very recent time, our ancestors lived in the same place. They buried bodies in the ground. The bodies degraded, became food for plants, which they ate. So they were of their dead. The ants are still doing that process. So the ants are still breaking stuff down, eating it, taking it underground, bringing oxygen all around in that super creative process by which the earth becomes fertile and all the recycling happens on the surface of the earth, right? They're the major recyclers. They're major architects. And they are a hive mind creature. So I'm going to get back to hive minds in just a minute as part of the lesson that we can take about why these totems are so important to us. One of the things to think about with ants is that they're bringing creative energy into the earth. They're bringing ancestral memory, all the stuff that's the history that's accumulated under the earth, or the things the earth holds, the energy that it holds, the physical, literal substances like things that are breaking down and being recycled. They're bringing that up to the surface also, okay? So they're major guides, in the sense, to that ancestral stream, right? And they work collectively. So I'll just get into this thing now about both the ants and the bees. Why these kind of creatures? Bees, if any of you are students of occultism, there are like 101 different occult orders that have used bees as their totem. And it's really obvious once you start studying bees, because bees are one of the creatures that have fascinated humans the longest. we have images of ancient Egyptians already being master beekeepers. So bees and humans have a very deep relationship, and not only do they kind of fascinate us, but they have taught us a lot of things. But the deeper, sort of for an esoteric lesson, the deeper esoteric lesson of both ants and bees is this fact that they get outside their own ego, right? So when we're working with them as spiritual guides, they are a guide to the collective, right? Because they act as a collective. Any kind of hive mind creature really is not an individual creature. It's the sum of all those creatures. So an individual hive with its queen and its workers and its drones is a single entity, is what the way science is describing it now, right? And so they make decisions as a collective. They resource use as a collective. They live and die as collectives. So they are something that is greater than the sum of parts, right? And so for humans, this is a really important message because we really have this desire to be ourselves. Like, we're super individualistic. It's a way we express creativity, and that's really good. It's really kind of what we're supposed to do. It's like be innovative and explore and make mistakes and burn our fingers and learn more. But every once in a while, it's really good to think about a bigger unit than just ourselves, right? It's necessary for our survival, as well as magically, it's really powerful to join forces with others and set aside our individual ego needs to do something bigger. So hive mind creatures, both bees and ants, are all about that. They're all about enacting the plan that is bigger than the individual. They're about understanding at a gut level and following at a gut level the directive, the prime directive, whatever that prime directive be. Now, it may be coming from your queen. Maybe you don't like the queen, but actually as an ant or a bee, you don't really get a question that queen. There's not a vote. Right? So it's beyond that level of collectivity. It's not democracy. It's another level deeper than that. And not saying that that's a model for human society, but there's some serious lessons that we can learn there about getting outside of our own self. And about connection, right? So this is the other thing that my coven brother Coral helped me with on this workshop, is he said the hive mind creatures never feel separated or isolated or lonely. It's not a possibility, right? Setting aside again, we are. This is a safe space for thinking freely. We don't need to know whether animals have emotions right now. Okay, so a bee or an ant, that type of energy. That again, they're a metaphor for a type of energy. That's why we have animal totems. They're metaphors. They're a metaphor for a collective in which the parts are all essential to the whole. Right? There would be no whole if it didn't have all these parts. It's not just the queen that's necessary to a beehive. There's no honey, there's no food, there's no babies if there's not all the other parts as well. So that type of energy is something in which there is no ability for anyone to be disconnected. Any one part of it cannot really be disconnected. Right? And so this myth that we have, that we are individuals walking alone on our own, fully responsible only for ourselves, nobody really ever looking out for us, not part of a bigger master plan, is mediated by this idea of the hive. It's treated. It's like the hive mind creatures are a prescription to address our feelings of isolation. That's one of the reasons to really work with these insect energies, is to get to that place where it's a nice visual reinforcement or auditory, whichever type of learner you are, of the fact that everything is actually very connected. Okay, so bees they're bringing celestial energy, they're bringing sunlight and into the creative process of pollination, right? So that's their main thing that we know about what they do. They do a whole lot of other stuff too, but they are basically that metaphor for the power of the celestial, whether it be stars or sun, our star or all the stars or the upper world, or however you want to think about it, to this earth. Also bridgers. So just like ants are bringing oxygen up and bridging, the bees are bringing sunlight down. They're helping plants to grow. They're moving pollen around. They're connecting things. They're moving lots of energy, lots of sparkly energy. Another lesson from these animals is this bridging work that they're doing. Right? They're bringing things from one state to another. Okay, so then the third is the spider. And spiders are really different, right? So as I was starting to work on this too and talking about it, I have a lot more background with bees and ants than I do with spiders, although spiders are wicked awesome. Nobody can argue. There's so many different kinds of spiders. They do so many different things. But I think Steve pointed out first, they're very solitary too, compared to the hive mind creatures, right? So super different, which is why they're a great totem for humans on this surface world. We are basically solitary, doing our thing. We could aspire to a collectivity at times, but it's not really truly our nature, right? We can learn from the positive value of that collectivity and the idea of it, of working on something bigger and putting aside our needs of our own self. But really we're kind of people doing our thing. So spiders are collectors, right? They create. So they collect things and they create things. They create these beautiful webs which collect more stuff. And then they eat that stuff and they create more from that. And they're constantly in that process of gathering and integrating, and gathering and integrating and creating and making things that other spiders see and that other bugs see and that communicate information in different ways. So they interact in that way. So they're very much involved in that creative process. And I want to just, as an example of another, so they're bridging, right? They're connecting. They're making stuff. They're doing stuff, digging stuff here, there, pretty much all on this plane, but they're still bringing energy together and they're doing stuff with it. Really cool stuff, different kinds of creative stuff, whatever. And there's a really sweet, in the spirit of honoring things of this land, there's a really sweet myth about the spider. So this is a Cherokee version of a story about the spider that is probably just the same myth that all the southeastern native people use, because the spider is a really common image on shell gorgets and stuff from archaeological sites. It always has a cross on its back. So here's the story. Long, long ago, there was no fire, and the world was very cold. Then the thunder set their lightning and put fire in the bottom of a hollow sycamore tree that grew on an island. The animals knew it was there because they could see the smoke, but they couldn't get to it over the water. They held a council to decide what to do. Every animal that could swim or fly was anxious to be the one to bring back the fire. Raven offered to go first. Because he was so large and strong, they thought that he could surely do it, so he was sent. He flew high and far across the water and alighted on a sycamore tree. While he was wondering what to do next, the heat scorched all of his feathers black. He was frightened, and he returned without the fire. Then the little screech owl volunteered and reached the place safely. But he was looking down into the hollow of the tree, and a blast of hot air came up at him, and he burned out his eyes. He managed to fly back home, but his eyes are red to this day. Next went hoot owl and horn owl. By the time they reached the tree, the fire was so fierce that smoke almost blinded them. The ashes carried by the wind made rings around their eyes that are still there today. But they had to return without the fire. Well, no more birds dared to attempt this great feat, so the snakes decided to give it a try. The black racer swam out to the island and crawled through the grass. He squeezed through a tiny hole in the bottom of the tree, but the heat and smoke were too much for him. After dodging about blindly over the hot ashes, he managed by luck to find a hole and crawl out again. But his body had been scorched very black, and to this day he darts about as if he's still trying to escape that fire. The great black snake, the climber, offered next. He swam over, and he climbed up the outside of the sycamore, as was his habit. Predictably, the smoke choked him, and he fell into the trunk, burning himself black in the process. He survived, but he also did not bring back the fire. Cold and dismayed, the animals held another council. All the birds, the snakes, and the four-footed creatures came up with good excuses for not venturing back across the water to the tree. Finally, the little water spider said that she would like to try. This is a little spider with black downy hair who can run on over water or dive under it. That's in the story. The other animals were relieved for a volunteer to step forward, but they wondered how she would possibly carry the fire back. Don't worry, she said, I will use thread from my body to spin a little bowl and fasten it to my back. The animals watched in wonder as the little water spider crossed the water, found a tiny hole in the bottom of the trunk, and put one tiny coal in her bowl, and brought it back. Ever since, we've been warmed by fire, and more importantly, the smoke has carried our prayers to Creator. And the little water spider still carries red marks on their back, lest we forget their grandmother's great accomplishment. Isn't that cool? So I think that ties in really well with the concept of spiders as creators, and they're making things, and they're gathering different forms of information and bringing it together, just like we do, right? That's a good lesson for us. So now, an important part of this workshop is talking about the fear that many of us have about possibly certain insects. And I think this is one of probably the most interesting part of the workshop, because what did we do last night in the firewalk but face our fears and reclaim our power from having faced fears? It is incredibly powerful when we have deep-seated fears. Any deep-seated fear. Aleister Crowley knew this. This is where I learned it. It's from him first. If you have a deep-seated fear of something, that's a source of power that you are overlooking. You have it causes a strong emotional reaction. It causes your body to physically react to something. Just the idea of something, that's power. Okay? That's exactly what witches are tapping into, and pagans are tapping into when we tap into power. We're tapping into a sense of energy that's so strong it causes a physical reaction. We'd like it to be a pleasant reaction, a spacey, happy reaction maybe, a feeling of heart-open connectedness, but if it's fear, that's also power, right? So this fear of insects, I believe, is a symptom of our disconnect, a symptom of our sense of understanding that the world is connected, but not being allowed to believe it. What was one of the most common things that witches were accused of in the Inquisition? Yeah, all the communication they were having with animals, right? Familiars. If you had a familiar, that was a smoking gun that you were a witch, right? And while we think often about familiars like black cats or rabbits, witches could communicate with any kind of animal. And insects are actually a phenomenal source of information. And I say this after having done this work a little bit with insects, mostly with bees, but with ants as well now. They are like the nervous system of the earth. This is part of the workshop where we're going to continue to allow ourselves to believe things which we don't necessarily, our dominant culture may or may not actually agree with. But there are so many insects they're everywhere, right? There is no piece of the earth in which there is not an ant. So we have not yet found it. Right? Somebody's looking for it. It probably doesn't exist. And so they're everywhere. And just like when you tune in with your dog, if you tune in with an ant, you're not just tuning in with the ant, right? You're tuning into the hive, the whole collectivity, right? Because there's no single consciousness for the hive minds. And so you have information available to you from that entire collectivity. So if you wanted to know what was going on the other side of the lake, you just ask an ant here. The ant says, like, give me a second, and then they tell you, right? Because they're already plugged into that information network. That's the only way they operate. Bees fly a mile to get pollen and bring it back. But while they're gone, the bees in the hive know what's going on with the bees that are out looking. There's information flow. Yes, they come back and they do the waggle dance and they shake their butt to tell you exactly how to get there. But we now know that that dance isn't really essential for the bees. The bees already have some information sent via magical pheromones and stuff that we can't see, but that we know science sort of says, yeah, that stuff's there. Ants do the same thing. They leave these chemical trails, which are not visible. But the ants totally dig it. They can get it. They can follow it. There's different chemical trails for different deliciousnesses of food. All of that stuff is invisible, but happening. So, the hive mind creatures in particular, but all insects, because they're so super mega plentiful, major source of information. You want to know what the weather's going to be like, you might want to ask insects, or birds, of course, because their birds are, like insects, early predictors of things. They have more to lose, they're more vulnerable to the weather, so they're more attuned to it than mammals. Insects even more so. Insects don't even have to worry so much about whether they are going to individually live or die, but they are so plugged into the environment that minor temperature changes affect them, right? Minor changes in salinity or moisture affect them. You know that you see more bugs after the rain or not when it's raining. You know, bugs are super attuned to environmental changes. So they receive a lot of information. They process mega amounts of information. So I'm totally convinced that they're like a nervous system for the earth, that they are receiving information about stuff that's going on, both environmental, but also energetic. And they're kind of synthesizing that information and then doing with it what they need to do their job. If we, as people who know that we're plugged into the inscape, tap into that, we have this network of information available to us. So, I believe, because we know that a lot of witches were beekeepers, a lot of witches today are beekeepers, a lot of witches in the past were beekeepers, I think witches talk to insects all the time. What's more spooky and witchy than a spider, right? So, like, witches are totally into this kind of stuff. So I think that perhaps we were totally into insects. We totally got that. They were a major ally, that they could help us with information, but with also just, having enough food to eat. And we had to promise not to do it anymore. Starhawk talks about wicked oaths. Wicked oaths are the things that we had to promise not to do when we were being persecuted. I promise I'll never talk to the stars again. I promise I'll never dance naked outside at night. I promise I'll never talk to the dead. And we had to do them to stay alive. Some of us managed to sneak around and still do it, but we were really stressed about that because basically we might die if we did that. Some of us are just so frightened of ever dying or of seeing our families die that we just didn't do it again. We just stopped. I want to live. I want my family to live. I've seen people die for doing this. I'm not going to do it again. And that was a break, a fundamental break that we're still in recovery from as pagans. Right? These are our own ancestors. These aren't another group of people. Anybody of European heritage that went through this. Anybody of indigenous New World heritage went through this. Right? Anybody who was colonized. And so sometimes what happens when you promise not to do something is that it becomes a terrifying thing to you. The thought of doing it and seeing what might happen if you did it again, the risk of having your family caught or having your family persecuted, just turns into a ball of fear, a ball of stress. A kink, Orion talks about kinks in the flow. That's a huge kink. I'm not going to talk to the animals anymore. That fear can carry and be passed down. We now know all kinds of phobias and all kinds of emotional experiences are passed down genetically and inherited trauma. So part of what we need to do is just take a look at this idea. I'm not telling you that you need to get rid of the fear of insects, because it may still be serving your soul's purpose in some way to hold on to that. But I'm going to suggest that you are turning over some of your power, that you're surrendering some of your power by being afraid of insects. And I've got various ideas about why people say, but I don't like things that crawl on me. Well, you know what? When you're more aware of insects, okay, when you drop the fear level a little bit, just do it for a day. Just like say, okay, today I'm not going to be afraid of bugs. You drop the fear level, that allows your awareness level to increase. Suddenly you see them everywhere. So you don't want a bug to crawl on you. You become more aware of bugs so that they don't have the opportunity to sneak up on you. That's one thing people don't like, is the sneaky nature. They're sneaky because we're not tuned in enough to see them. If you were just sitting in meditation and really present, there's no bug that could sneak up on you, really, right? You would see those bugs. So if you don't like the sneaky thing, if that's your thing, just drop the fear a bit and allow the awareness level to rise so that you can be more aware of them so they don't sneak up on you. If you're worried about the dangerousness of the bugs, do a little research, right? I did some research. Surprisingly, there's only one confirmed death of brown recluse spider bite in Florida ever, right? There's hundreds of false bites. People think they got bit by a brown recluse spider. They go to the ER, now freaked out, and it gets recorded as a brown recluse spider, but then it's never actually a brown recluse spider. These opportunities for us to be really harmed by bugs are very few and far between. Right? Again, like birds, bugs have a huge investment in survival. They don't have a lot of defenses, so they don't want to interact with humans very much, right? Because we're clumsy and mean.
We squish them.
We squish them easily, right? They really don't want to interact with us a whole lot. Bees only sting because they will die when they sting. Okay? Just keep that in your mind. They will die when they sting. So they will only sting if their only other choice is that they think they're going to die. The hive tells them. So a lot of the fear is based on misinformation. Is part of it too. because culturally we have this fear. Culturally, we support each other in the fear of bugs, and telling kids to be afraid of bugs and just kind of constantly worrying about spiders and things like that into a source of bad. But, we're pagans. We know that there's really nothing inherently bad on this earth, right? Annoying, yes. Mosquitoes, definitely. But bad? It just doesn't make sense. It's not the way the earth works. I'm not saying everything's wonderful and sweetness and light, because things gotta die. And sometimes they die brutally. But that's not really bad, right? We all know that. We don't want the planet to be overpopulated with anything, so things have to die, right? That's part of the whole circle of life. So bugs are just doing their thing, and we need to kind of maybe just allow ourselves to think about this as a source of power that we can reclaim. What do you guys think? How are you feeling?
Any tips for communicating with?
Yeah. So what beekeepers do is you sort of have to move your consciousness back to the reptilian part of the brain. So away from the front where you have a lot of chatter about bees are dangerous, bees will sting, bees will hurt me, I'm going to hurt for bees, bees get stuck, people die from bee stings. That stuff, just like, you have to really chill. So if you're good with dogs, then you can be good with bees, is what people say. Because dogs, you can't have like, oh, this dog's going to bite me, I'm really scared of dogs, I don't know what to do about this dog. The dog's like, alert. Alert, there's a freaked out human. There's a freaked out large mammal around me.
When you excrete adrenaline, your pheromones excrete, and they smell it, and I'm sure that other animals do too.
Yes, and that's exactly what bees do, is they totally pick up on the vibe of the person, and that's why beekeepers don't.
Too. I had a spider on me one time for hours and did not. And when we saw each other, of course, it was for a little while. But I was phobic of them for years and years and years. I wouldn't even go out in my yard and I lived in the woods. It was like stifling out there. Finally one day I was like, I can't live this. So I started to go out and be braver and braver. And like I said, I became much more aware. I could see them now. So I could maneuver with them, around them, respect them, integrate more now than I ever did. It's amazing to me just how much of a phobia I had and how much I don't now, that I can sit and let things crawl on me and still continue to meditate and be calm, and I never get bit.
Well, that's the key. If you don't want to get bit, stay calm.
The same way. Everybody else is running around, and I'm like, just stand there. We're making a fuss. They're just checking you out.
Oh, totally. With the bees, it's all about being chill. It's very much about being chill and not freaking them out. So,
and just, I guess, just learning my own body so that I can be in tune with her.
And I think that's an example of shifting our consciousness so that it's not just about us so much, it's also about them. So if you the beekeepers also teach you, if you're going to just realize that you're walking into their world. So how would you walk into a guest house, right? You're going to walk into a guest house screaming and kicking stuff over and acting like a jerk. You're going to try and adapt to the guests, whatever the guest offers, right? You're trying to keep your energy a little bit contained so you're not broadcasting and blasting. You're going to kind of be sort of integrate, right? And so that's, I think, one of the things we can do with any kind of animal communication. Works that way. It's like trying to bring your energy to their wavelength. When you bring your energy to their wavelength, suddenly there's at least a less of a dissonance between them, right? And so you can kind of feel like maybe it's a good process to just do it a little bit at a time if you do have any of these fears, and just kind of drop the fear a little bit and just kind of try and sense where they're at. And then, you can follow it farther and farther and go more and more with it if you actually want to, like what you're describing, which sounds amazing. But I think in terms of communicating, it's the same thing. So for me, it's been exactly the same thing as breathing with grass. If you want to communicate with plants, you just quiet down. First, you tell yourself that this is possible. Mm-hmm. Allow yourself that gift. This is all possible. Then you quiet down. You just start breathing. Exchanging the breath with plants. Gardeners do this instinctively. They're already attuned to what the plant. Does the plant need water? Does the plant need more sun? Kind of feeling out the plant, how it's doing. Animals, I think you have to be a little bit even more gentle because they have their own organism going more so than plants. Plants are basically okay with humans coming up and being all up in their stuff, because that's part of the contract between plants and humans. And most of the domesticates they enjoy that contact with humans. I think animals are at a different vibrational place, and they don't necessarily enjoy humans. They don't have any positive interaction with humans. So to go on at all. So you got to think about that. So if you're going to meet, it's like meeting an alien. If you're going to meet the aliens and they never have ever met any positive, nice humans, you got to go slow. Be really, really chill so that you don't offend. And so I think the ant thing, I mean, bees is pretty easy because you have the fear factor to motivate you to be chill. I know that if I'm not chill, my ass will get stopped. So I'm going to be chill. Ants, it's not the same, although you could try it with fire ants, and that would be some motivation also to be very chill. But I think it's the same principle. Dropping energy down, trying to just be present, and then to maybe breathe a little bit and just see how that goes. If the breathing goes okay, you're not demanding that the insect breathe with you or exchange or give you anything. You're just kind of being in its presence. And then if the being in its presence goes okay, then you might want to go a little bit farther with it in exchange.
I wanted to share something here, and I don't tell this to everybody, so, because, if you do, people think you're imagining it or cuckoo or whatever. But I get some amazing pictures of bees and butterflies landing on flowers just by standing there with a sense of wonderment and asking them, not in words verbally, but just say, just stay, I want to take your picture, just stay. And I have had them sit there and pose, literally. And then, Riken will come up and he'll go, what are you doing? And they are gone. He's invaded the energy, but he's very projective, so he really has a hard time, packing it back. But, just going up with a sense of wonder and awe and, oh, you're so cool and I love you. Can I take your picture? I don't need anything. Just stay still for a minute so I can admire you. And they do.
Who wouldn't want to be around energy like that, right?
They
you can walk
do.
up to any creature and say, oh, you're so cool, I just want to stand next to you. You're pretty much going to be all right with it.
If you're intent, you have that intent, and it really is, you exude love and wonderment and awe and appreciation, and I find that they do just, okay, you want to see me? I'll hang out and let you see me.
And I think one of the interesting things about insect communication and attunement is scale. I think we also try very hard sometimes to focus on individuals, but for things like bees and ants especially, I think what we need to is trying to attune to the hive or the colony level first, because that's more natural for them and for us in terms of tuning each other, I think.
Right. No, that's a really good
Trying
point.
to make them fit your model of how you think about yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's what works. That's what I meant to convey by saying it's like working with grass. So when we breathe with grass, we're not breathing with the blade of grass. We're breathing with the network of roots under that of the grass plant, right? Or you do that with people who are doing that with mycelium now. It's the network that is the entity. And so I think, yeah, absolutely, with an ant hive. Maybe kind of get that. I find it super overwhelming, actually. There's so much information. I think that's why I have this feeling of it being like a nervous system, because the hive is just 10 bazillion things going on at once. Almost really hard to process for the human brain. But maybe that's just the initial touching, and then kind of there's a point at which you can kind of see feel the bigger thing happening.
So to come back to the part where totems are doing metaphors for our three different parts of our soul, the dream walkers, the ant, hive mind. So does that kind of mean our dream walkers to be hive minded together? The same with the Star World. And
yeah, that's kind of what Coral was teaching me, was that he really thinks our Star Walkers and our Dream Walkers are parts of collectivities. They're not individuated in the way that those realms are the nature of them is reflected in those particular kinds of animals. So the nature of those energies are that they are about collective good or collective growth or collective something.
I found it funny that you mentioned the whole inherited fear. I remember my mom, she's always been deathly afraid of grasshoppers and crickets and stuff. And I just always recall as a kid, just hearing her freak out over them, even though I don't even think she's ever come in contact with them, here. It's just, from back and working in the fields and, all that stuff. And I remember I was in the Everglades once, and they're, these big, it's, big orange locust-type looking grasshoppers. And, I was there, and everyone started, just, letting them crawl on them, and I just got this surge of anxiety, because I've just heard my whole life, and I'm super chill with bugs. I love bugs. I geek bugs. But, then came, the grasshoppers and the fear and everything, and then I finally did it. I was like, okay, let's do this. And I just had this notion, after hearing it so many times, that this was going to be some vicious creature. And this grasshopper was just, it was almost catatonic. It was, just, moving on my arm, so chill, so soft. Its touch was so soft. You see these, it looks so hard with the whole exoskeleton. Its feet are, kind of barbed almost. And it's just, this menacing-looking creature. And it was just, the most chillest moment of my life. And it was just, I ended up, doing half the trail with it on my arm. Because it was just okay there. And that was, a big part of, once I got over that, that's it. I've never been afraid of spiders or anything, just because when I was little, I went to some show, those animal shows, and they, I was like, hey, me, I'll do it, and then they put, this huge tarantula on me, and I just had it on for, the duration of the show, and it was awesome. But, yeah, just the whole, you hear these things, and you start having this, notion of what it is after just, the fear gets passed on to you. And then you're like, wait a minute, this isn't what it is at all, so gotta give them a chance.
In fact, that's a nature versus nurture argument, right? Where you're saying, okay, I learned it, and I remember learning it, visually and physically and orally from my mom. But there are studies that some of the anxieties that get passed on can get passed on literally in your DNA, genetics, and, it could come from your grandmother who you never met, and so it's about, you're combating both of those things for some of us.
Yeah, and I don't want to give the impression that I think there's, we should all be friends with all animals. Obviously, we have to show caution with certain animals, and there are reasons to be wary and smart about spiders. There's only two types of spiders in Florida, but I think we can also acknowledge that a lot of the fears are totally irrational. It's not I'm afraid of coming across a black widow, and so I'm going to freak out if I see a black widow. No, it's all spiders everywhere. Mm-hmm. You never want to see one. Burn the house down, as Raven said. If there's a spider, burn the house down. That's gone way beyond the actual risk that the black widow presents to the human. To a whole other level of territory.
Yeah, I was amazed when my mother wanted to move to Florida because she always was completely phobic about bugs, to the point where you could hear her scream on the second floor.
Did she get over it?
No. No, we were like,
Mom,
an
opportunity for growth.
You're in the wrong state if you don't like bugs and, things like that.
Presenting her an opportunity for growth. But this is a bigger point that's really also very interesting, which is that we have to honor our fears. Our fears are they are both irrational, but also grounded in something, right? So it's worth taking some time to think about those and just, again, coming back to what Knight was just saying about, let's just be conscious with this, with ourselves. And we can say, we have a fear of this, but that's worth exploring and trying to figure out is it limiting you to have that fear? Is it limiting you so that you can't leave your house comfortably, or you can't go camping, or you can't, go to the beach because you're afraid of sharks in the water? That's definitely surrendering your power, right? I don't think everybody has to be totally down with all bugs, but I think if bugs and a fear of bugs are interrupting your ability to enjoy something you want to do, then you're surrendering your power. And that's something that you can address. That's the thing. It's a tool. This is a toolkit thing.
I never thought of just asking the ants to move.
Michelle Small-Wright is really good to read on that. So this is a really important book also on this whole concept called Believing as if the God in all things mattered. And so she's a permaculture person, and she had a problem in her garden with slugs. I think it was slugs eating the cabbage. Because she was into communicating with the plants and getting information from them about what to put on the ground and how many to plant when and all that stuff. She's like, maybe this will work with the slugs too. And so she's like, slugs, guys, we need the cabbage to grow. Like, what if, and they're like, well, but we need cabbage too. And she's like, yeah, but what if, like, we gave you some cabbage and then you left the other cabbage? And they're like, that's fine. And so she planted a row of cabbage that she totally let them destroy, and then they didn't touch the rest of the cabbage.
Wow.
She's super, super plugged in. You know, it's the same idea that, like, there's a way that you can, you know, balance it out. And I think a whole other interesting workshop would be to think about the difference between communicating with animals and plants. Because it is a different skill set. All right, I just want to give you one last thing to go with, take with you as you go. When you have an interaction with a bug, that you maybe just give yourself that little chance to say, I'm going to call some power back to me. I'm not going to allow this little wee creature to dominate the situation quite so much. We're going to maybe find a place where we can be a little bit more at ease with one another. All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, this is Alpandia, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Reaching for the Moon. Before we get started with our final segment of this episode, I'd like to invite you to our annual Yuletide celebration, Turning the Tide. EMLC has been hosting Turning the Tide for over 10 years. This year, we're celebrating Saturnalia. Come join us for a private weekend of ritual, workshops, drumming, fun, and community. You can register quickly and easily at our website, emlc.net. Just click on the Turning the Tide graphic on our homepage. Your registration includes cabin or camping space, all the rituals and workshops offered throughout the weekend, breakfasts, a potluck dinner, and drumming. Get registered before November 25th and save $25 per person. We can't wait to celebrate with you. Io Saturnalia!
And now we'll hear a song from Mama Gina called Grandmother Tree from her album I Remember Love. If you want to learn more about Mama Gina or purchase her music, you can do that at mamaginamusic.com. I hope you've enjoyed this bonus episode of our podcast, and I hope you can make it to Turning the Tides this year. Remember to register before the 25th when the price goes up. Blessed be.
Grandmother stands with her daughters nearby, some of them fallen and some of them true. Depends on the rain and the sunlight that flows, if her footsteps take 10 years or 2. She walks and she reaches her roots and her limbs, embracing the weak on the weak. She journeys from center, upwards she spins. She travels and ever she stays. She was born of a mother who fell in a storm, a fire that crackled with light. An orphan, she reached for the roots of her kin, as slumbered a long winter's night. She drank in their memories, she swallowed their bones, and awoke in the spring to the sun. For the light that can kill you can also bring hope, and the grandmother she would become. Call her goddess, call her ancient one, the woman who walks in the wood. She is crone of the grove, leaf, root, and limb, and she still stands wherever she stood. The spider, the beetle, the burrowing oak, the coon and the doe and the bear, they leave their mark she erases in time, as if they never were there. The cricket, the frog, The falcon, the wren raise their voice in continuous hum. Their lives are too short for her to attend, yet grandmother tree is their home. Call her goddess, call her ancient one, the woman who walks in the wood. She's crone of the grove, leaf, root, and limb, and she still stands wherever she stood. Now the path has been paved, and the travelers it brings mark their progress in seconds, not years. But the roots will not hold through the aeons, she knows, and grandmothers shed no tears. Or they may revere her or stand at her guard. They may wield the blade that hastens her fall. She slumbers and sings a green lullaby soft to the child at her heart who will outlive them all. Call her goddess, call her ancient one, the woman who walks in the wood. She is crone of the grove, leaf, root, and limb, and she still stands wherever she stood. Call her goddess, oh yeah, call her ancient one, the woman who walks in the wood. She's crone of the grove, leaf, root, and limb, and she still stands wherever she stood. Call her goddess, call her ancient one, the woman who walks in the wood. She is crone of the grove, leaf, root, and limb, and she still stands wherever she stood. She still stands wherever she stood. She still stands wherever she